The Moss Report is brought to you by Mycolife, makers of the world's best mushroom extracts, including the Moss Method mushroom formula, available exclusively at mycolife.us. Hello, healers. My name is Ben, and this is the Moss Report. I'm here today with my father, author and founder of the Moss Report, Dr. Ralph W. Moss. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning, Ben.
So before we get started introducing the topic for today, I first want to wish you, a couple of days early, a very happy birthday. And you know, of course, we have many people out there who have been following you, some of them for decades, and I'm sure that they'll all join me in wishing you many, many more happy birthdays to come.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And for those of you out there, if you'd like to put a comment, that always helps to support the channel. Put a like, doesn't hurt. So today we're going to be discussing a topic that I don't have that much knowledge about, and I'm not sure what you're going to be telling us. As I understand it, it's called modified citrus pectin. And apparently you found some information about this substance that you think that people should know. So what have you found?
Well, I've been following this story since the 1990s, mid-1990s. So this is going back, 30 years into sort of the midpoint of my career. And it really came to my attention, it came to the world's attention, I'd say, with a paper out of Michigan that was discussing the effect of something called modified citrus pectin on metastases in animals and in cells. And it was a very important paper. It came from somebody who's since gone on to have a fantastic career in the field of urology. And it was initially about prostate cancer, although it does pertain to other kinds of cancer as well.
You want to mention their name?
Of course. And his name was Kenneth Ken Pienta.
Okay.
And he became the head of research at the world-famous Brady Urological Institute at Johns Hopkins, perhaps the most famous urology institute in the country, if not the world. So he went on to have a glorious career, and he's still functioning urological oncologist there at Johns Hopkins. But when he was in Michigan, he was instrumental in doing this research on this very unusual, unlikely substance, and also figuring out how it worked. So it was sort of like, Athena came full blown out of the head of Zeus, and this substance came full blown out of the head of Ken Pienta, with the explanation for why this should work, and then the demonstration that in animal research it did work.
And that's something that I'm always asking. Why does this work? And
right.
There's always an answer.
So we have a couple of things going on here with this story that make it unusual for us, Ben. So one is we know the mechanism. We think we know the mechanism. It's no secret. It's been around 30 years. It's only gotten stronger. That association has gotten stronger. And the other thing we've got is clinical data. And,
Okay.
I'm always sort of half apologizing for the things that I believe in, the natural methods, because, we have to be frank with people and honest that oftentimes all the arrows are pointing in the right direction, but that doesn't mean that it's something that's been shown in an actual human clinical situation to be beneficial.
Right.
Here, we do have that information, and I'll go into as much detail as you'd like to discuss that. But
I want to hear everything.
That's why it makes me excited and optimistic, and something that definitely is actionable.
So what did the original study indicate?
Well,
as you said, it related to metastases.
Right.
So was that his initial avenue, was to try to research it as it related to metastases and cancer?
and prostate cancer specifically.
Okay.
So this is super, super important. Prostate cancer is the second leading cause of cancer deaths in men, at least in U.S. and many other countries. So it isn't just an odd, inconsequential finding. It's something very important. Before we get into that, what the study actually showed, I should explain what it is. What's pectin, what's citrus pectin, and what's modified about it.
Right.
Okay.
Well, but let me just say before you do that,
Yeah.
of course, it goes without saying that we know about the benefits of citrus products as it relates to them being a good source of vitamin C.
Right.
I'm assuming this doesn't have anything to do with that. Is that right?
That's right. Because
So this is something else completely that comes from citrus.
True.
Okay.
Yeah, and the pectin, which is basically the same substance that's used to make jams and jellies. Well, every good 19th century housewife knows about pectin. It's still sold in the stores, pectin, especially around the time that people are starting to use harvest their fruit and can and so forth, which we have some people in our own family who do that, right?
Including my wife.
Right, and that's who I'm thinking of.
Who's not even from the 19th century.
I'm teasing. But in any case, so yes, you can buy pectin in the store. It's just a buck or two. No big deal. But that pectin won't work.
Is that citrus pectin? That is...
yes, I believe it is.
Okay.
And they don't use... if I'm remembering correctly, they don't use grapefruit, but the other citrus fruits, limes, lemons, and oranges. And it isn't the juicy fruit part that they're looking for. It's the pith and the peel, or the inside of the peel that yields the most pectin, and that's what they take. But unlike ordinary pectin, or unlike other fibrous substances you may be familiar with, such as benefiber, which is a very fine product, by the way, for soluble fiber, which everybody should get in their diet, and that dissolves very nicely in any hot beverage and so forth. But this one is much more esoteric. The benefiber, just as another fiber type of product that you dissolve in a drink, and dissolves very well, but it's much larger molecule. And the chemical structure, the modified citrus pectin is small enough to pass through the stomach and the intestines rather readily, and get to work in the bloodstream and in the body and where you want it to go, namely to the cancer cells. But it's not, if it were still in its normal unmodified state, it would be the molecule is too large to pass through the gut. So very, very little of it would actually get into you, and so it won't have any effect. Now, I think Pienta is the person who discovered this chemically, but I'm not 100% sure. I know it burst on the scene because of his work and his co-authors in Michigan, but it makes all the difference. And it would have died, basically as a topic. It came and then it really went. He when he moved to Hopkins, he basically went into other directions, which are related in some ways. I've looked at his research recently, and it's related in some ways to the basic idea behind the modified citrus pectin, but it's nothing in the self-help direction, if you know what I mean. So that what makes this unusual is that it's available to the public, and has been for a long time.
Okay, so am I understanding that the modified part of the modified citrus pectin specifically, it refers to the reduction of the size of the molecule? Is that the modification?
Correct. And it's done.
Okay, so sorry to follow up with
No,
that.
go ahead.
Then if you were going out and just eating orange rinds or orange pith, for example, it wouldn't confer the same benefit.
Not at all. You'd get some benefit. The bioflavonoids that St. Albert St. Georgi discovered around the same time he discovered the nature of vitamin C.
That's right. I remember about that to some degree.
Yeah.
So then this is not relating to bioflavonoids per se either.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Totally different class of compounds.
Okay, fascinating. So, all right. So then you're saying he dropped the subject and moved on to other things, and then where did it get picked up?
Not too long after that, a friend of mine, somebody I know very well, Isaac Eliaz, also came across this paper and realized that it wasn't really going to go anywhere in terms of the world, because Pienta had moved on to other things. So he started to he started a company called Econugenics to manufacture this and make it available as a supplement. Isaac is an MD. He's a brilliant person, and has made a number of very interesting and important discoveries. And he runs a clinic, and he's just an all-around unusual person whom I came to know very well and still do.
I've had the pleasure to speak with him as well.
Yes.
Very nice man.
He is. He even was my house guest at one time when I was living in Pennsylvania. I forget what he was in the area, and I invited him over. And anyway, I have a good personal relationship with him, I'm proud to say. And he picked this up. He didn't invent it, but he picked it up and modified the modification, if you will, because it's now they use heat, and they use acid, and they use pH, changing the pH. So it's basically maximized for its ability to get into the bloodstream and therefore get to the cancer.
The bioavailability.
Correct. So Isaac took this up, and he pursued this for decades. He since has moved on, not so much focused on that, and he sold his stake in Econugenics, but it's still there, still flourishing, and it's really, there's been quite a few articles, I forget how many, but there are dozens of scores of, I would say, of articles on this topic in the medical literature.
But it can be gotten. I mean, it's not faded into obscurity so that you can't even get it.
Here we are.
Oh, we're having show and tell already. Okay.
That's all I got.
Okay.
This is my total show and tell.
All right.
But anyway, there's a lot of nice information
Yep.
about this. He says 65. They say 65 published papers. He's got patents on it. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 patents. So it's a very legitimate thing. It's something that everybody should know about, I would say.
Well, we know that there's a lot of things out on the market, and in terms of health foods and supplements.
Yeah.
But very few, as you mentioned earlier, have clinical studies. So are you going to now tell us a little bit about that, or is there anything else in between now and then?
Well, no, I'll tell you about that, because that's sort of the cutting to the bottom line in a way.
Right.
There have been a few clinical tests, but the main one is contained in 2 papers, one from 2021 and one from 2023. It's the same clinical trial, and it's the same group, but they did a 6-month study with some data on what happened at 1 year, and then they expanded that, and they have more complete data from 2 years more.
Okay.
As with other studies that we've talked about, one of the main ways you measure something in prostate cancer is by its effect on the PSA, the prostate-specific antigen test. It's a common test that's used by urologists all over the world. And the doubling time, the PSA DT, is a standard measurement of benefit. If you can extend the period in which the PSA is doubling in number in its size, then you're getting a positive effect. And in this study, which was done in Israel, at I think about 12 authors at 8 different institutions,
Okay.
the response rate in terms of PSA and in terms of not having recurrences of the disease was 78%. That was 36 out of 46 patients had a positive response. Now I'll explain in more detail what that means. There was improvement in the PSA doubling time in 75% of the patients. So this was pretty amazing. And the paper came out, as I say, in 2021. It got a lot of play in the public media, and it got a fair number of people who work with the topic of pectin around the world also cited it in their papers. In the interim, I don't know exactly what happened, but when the second paper came out, it got almost no attention. This may actually, other than one trade journal, this podcast may be the only place that you would find this paper discussed. But the second paper was far more significant than the first paper. So this has to do, I think, with commercial questions and who's paying. Who's going to put this out on the PR, Newswire, and so forth. It's not a clear-cut explanation for why the better or the more complete paper would have less publicity, but it got next to no publicity.
So when you say paper, was each of those papers looking at a different study, or were they two papers looking at the same study?
Right. There were two papers looking at the same study, but the second paper had more mature data.
I see.
And it only got better. The results only got better.
Okay. And that means by mature data, you're talking about the length of time between the clinical trial and the results. So if the results were going on for a longer period, then they had the ability to look at that over a longer period. Is that right?
That's right. The same patients, same authors, and the same dose of the modified citrus pectin, which was basically about one heaping teaspoon in a hot beverage, taken 2 to 3 times per day. I think it was 3 times on an empty stomach. Very important. Because remember, I said that the advantage of the modification of the pectin is that it passes through the intestines into the bloodstream.
Right.
If you eat a lot of other foods along with it, you won't get that advantage.
It's hanging around in the gastric system, getting dissolved by the stomach acids and everything else.
Exactly.
Right.
But you got to get it in there fast, and it'll pass through.
Right.
So when I take it, I put it into tea with nothing else in it, or I'll put it in black coffee maybe.
Does it have any taste?
It does. It has a very slight lemony taste, I would say.
Okay.
Which isn't bad in tea.
Yeah. In terms of ingredients, though, it's essentially just this pectin stuff, right? I mean, they're not touting it as having some other mystical or, hidden patented chemical additive, right? It's just the citrus pectin that they've done something to break it down to some degree, I guess.
That's right. The molecule is much smaller. It's like 100 times smaller than what you find in the benefiber, and it's I don't know how many multiple times smaller than what you would get in the pectin in stores. I guess I could figure that out. And I find that even in tea, it does impart, it changes the color of green tea, and it does impart a slight citrusy, no surprise, taste. Like if you were adding a squeeze of lemon to it. So it's not unpleasant, but it also does interfere a little bit with the wonderful flavor of green tea. I mean, interfere might be the wrong word, because it's not like you can't drink it. I have no
Right.
trouble drinking it.
But it changes it.
It changes it. It changes it. So, and I also find that this, nobody tells you this on the label, but you have to stir it quite a bit in order to get it to fully dissolve.
Okay.
It tends to want to clump together. There must be a workaround for this, but I haven't found it yet. But, these are tiny things
Right.
compared to what the actual results are with the study.
So that's how it comes, as a powder that needs to be dissolved in a liquid.
Correct.
It's
Correct.
not a capsule or something else that you
Right.
just take and swallow. Okay.
I'm not sure I fully answered your previous question. No, there's nothing else added, except they do have one form of it that has a lime flavor to it. I don't know why, but the lime flavor kind of masks the citrusy flavor, of the thing. But I don't need that. I mean, so I just have the powder one.
When I think about any kind of citrus rind, that's kind of a bitter, unpleasant taste.
Doesn't have the bitter flavor that I can detect. I'll quote what they say. It says, in patients without disease progression after the initial 6 months of therapy, they continue to give them the modified citrus pectin for a year. Of the 46 patients who entered the second treatment phase, 7 withdrew consent and decided to continue out of pocket on their own, and 39 then entered the second phase. And here's the results. After a total of 18 months, that was the first 6 months of the first paper, and then another year, 85%, or 33 out of 39, had a durable long-term response.
Okay, now just to be clear, that response that they're talking about is a decrease in PSA or an increase in the PSA doubling time?
It was either.
Okay.
Either. 62% had a decrease or stable PSA. So in other words, the cancer by PSA standards wasn't moving forward. 62%. That was 24 out of the 39 patients.
Wow.
90% had some improvement. We're aggregating the numbers here, but had some improvement. That's the total of 35 had some PSA doubling time improvement. All the patients in question had negative scans.
What does that mean?
They didn't have recurrence of cancer by MRIs or other scans.
They didn't have a recurrence. Okay. I'm just trying to get a clear picture of what that was. So these are men who had already had prostate surgery?
These were people who had a recurrence of cancer after having had previous treatment.
Okay. Oh.
So it's really all good,
Yeah.
I mean, one could quibble, I guess, with the main caveat here would be that 39 patients is not a large, great amount that you would be able to make firm conclusions based on. But most of this was highly statistically significant. In other words, less than a 1 in 20 chance of it being due to just accidental.
No, well, I mean, I think 39 patients is not an insignificant number. It's hard to get 39 patients in the same state of disease or at the same state of the progression of a disease to study at all.
That's right. But there had been, I wanted to mention, what I didn't mention was that between the Kenneth Pienta study and what we could call the Isaac Eliaz study in Israel, he was the senior author on that paper. There was another study from a very well-known, well-respected group called Prostate Oncology Specialists in Marina del Rey, who are very well-known in the field of integrative medicine. That's Mark Scholz, people might remember, who might note the name, Richard Lamb. These are all well-known figures in sort of the cutting edge of integrative urology. And Stephen Strum, and I know some of these people, and they studied modified citrus pectin in 10 men who had biochemical PSA failure. That just simply means that they weren't necessarily biopsied, but their PSA was going up after they had already been treated. Some of them actually were treated with cryoablation. They found that the PSA DT, the doubling time, increased in 7 out of the 10 men after taking modified citrus pectin for 12 months compared to before taking the MCP. Mm-hmm. So this was small, 10, and it came from a very well-regarded, well-recognized group, and it was certainly something of importance. And here's where my frustration comes in, Ben. It's about my lifetime of 50 years of frustration. Is it then took almost 20 years more before somebody followed up on this incredibly promising study in 10 men with a phase 2 trial. This could be considered like a phase 1 trial, with a phase 2 trial to demonstrate that indeed it was even better than what they found. So it confirmed the study from Mark Scholz and his colleague Dr. Guess was the first author on that. I call that the Guess clinical trial. This is I mean, I guess I'm like if anybody remembers what a broken record is, this is the broken record of my life, because I mean, I've been saying this literally for 50 years, that many things fall through the cracks in oncology and in many other areas of medicine because nobody can see their way to a profitable outcome with it. Right. And this is just, this is just something that I've been hammering away at, but it doesn't change anything. But here we are again. It's sort of like, again, like the interview that I did on the immunotherapy, where it almost died on the vine. I mean, it took almost 100 years for cancer immunotherapy to get accepted. And even then, it was a phenomenal struggle to get this done. As I mentioned, I know Isaac Eliaz, so I'm very familiar with the struggles that he's gone through. And he's as almost a persistent person as I am. So he just, kept on hammering away at this and going with this and figured out a way that, it could be of some interest commercially to other people, but it wasn't about the money. It was just doggedly pursuing the, this obviously beneficial thing.
And so, comparatively speaking, a supplement of this type compared to what chemo drugs and different things like that cost, it's a drop in the bucket. And also, I'm going to take liberties here. I'm going to say that it's probably non-toxic. Is that right?
Totally.
Right.
It's non-toxic as far as we know. I take it myself and I don't have, any sensation at all one way or the other, but it certainly doesn't upset my stomach or interfere with anything. Plus, it is purely a food substance. It's generally recognized as safe, GRAS, by the Food and Drug Administration. And it's very interesting because if you're undergoing radiation therapy for prostate cancer, as tens and hundreds of thousands of men find themselves in that situation, this idea of taking something like modified citrus pectin may actually be beneficial and almost certainly is not harmful. And nutritionists and oncologists and urologists who you discuss this with might be perfectly okay with you doing this because, as I say, it's a food. It's a generally recognized safe food. And radiation, one of the ways radiation works is by generating free radicals or singlet oxygen or reactive oxygen species. In other words, just oxygen that can be damaging to cells. And you don't want to stop that because that's one of the beneficial things is that when these free radicals or these dangerous oxygen molecules are generated, they kill cancer cells. Mm-hmm. But this is not an antioxidant per se. It may have some antioxidant qualities, but that's not how it's working. So it works in an entirely different parallel track to what the radiation is doing. And there's a paper on this, and I can read you, and people can see it on the screen, that modified citrus pectin reduces the metastatic properties of prostate cancer cells. I'm quoting. These findings provide modified citrus pectin as a radiosensitizing agent to enhance radiation cytotoxicity, or cell killing ability, overcoming resistance to radiation therapy, and can reduce the clinical radiation dose. That was a paper by Dr. Conti in 2018. So it kind of slipped, again, another paper that kind of slipped through the cracks, because I'd say most, great majority of oncologists have never heard of modified citrus pectin, much less read this rather esoteric paper that came, when I say paper, I mean scientific journal article.
Yeah.
So there is a substance in the body. I admit that I had never heard of it before I started reading, these papers and talking to Dr. Eliaz, and it's called Galectin-3. Galectin, like lectin, like the word lectin with the GA in front of it and the hyphen number 3. And this is a very interesting substance. It occurs naturally in the body. It has beneficial effects at a low level, but at a higher level, it's associated with inflammation. And cancer cells rely on it in numerous ways. We're looking at it in a holistic way as something that would fight against cancer cells, and specifically prostate cancer cells, wherever they're found in the body, because it's getting into the bloodstream, and it's going to counteract Galectin-3 and thereby lower down the temperature, if you will, of around the cancer, the microenvironment of the cancer. And so I would say that its potential is across the board, certainly in terms of prostate cancer, but there's also some cell line research that's, cultured cells, cancer cells, in other kinds of cancer, including breast cancer. So it went off in the direction of prostate cancer because Kenneth Pienta and many of these other people who worked on this were urologists, and they took an interest in it. So that's what happens in science. Sometimes you get a reputation for being effective in one kind of cancer, but then it turns out later on, when you prove your success in one kind, other people interested in other kinds of cancer pick it up. So I think ultimately this will prove of value in other kinds of cancer. But in this case, this study about radiosensitizer and prostate cancer is not a clinical trial.
Okay.
The clinical trial data is what I've presented so far.
Right. And that should be the strongest type of evidence that we look for with any kind of a substance, food or otherwise, in terms of showing a good effect or a negative effect against cancer.
We can't make a claim about any treatment that's only based upon laboratory research.
No, but I mean, we're talking about things that people can do. We're talking about the self-help realm.
Right.
And we just recently released another podcast about pomegranate, where it also showed some effect on the PSA DT, among other things.
Correct.
And so, I mean, if you can get some pomegranate powder, put it in a smoothie, and add a couple of tablespoons of citrus pectin, I mean, I guess my attitude is, what is it hurting? I mean, it costs a little bit, but it's nothing compared to what it would take to deal with a recurrence or having something being, unaddressed in the body that you're trying to push back on.
Right.
And here are these non-toxic, natural ways to help to push back against it. And there are clinical trials to show good effect. So I think that's great.
Right. And, this is something that will not raise your blood sugar. It will not interfere, even theoretically, with other treatments. So it seems like there's little reason for a person not to seriously consider doing this. Of course, needless to say, one should talk to one's doctors before you start any other treatment, because there are some complementary treatments that might interfere, or they may fear that it would. But in this case, I think not only is there no evidence that it interferes with radiation therapy, but there is a very good paper that makes a very strong case that this is probably another area of research that could be gone into very profitably, which would be to combine this now with radiation and then see what the effects are. My biggest issue, I would say, practically speaking, is how to find the time to do it, by which I mean that you can't really do this with your meal.
Right.
So, and you want to take 3 scoops. A scoop is, I measured it the other day, and it's like 1 heaping teaspoon. It comes with its own little scooper here, super scooper. Here we go.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
that's not too much of a inconvenience.
No, it's not.
Put a little timer on, or remember to add it to your time.
Right.
And if you're, especially as we strongly encourage everyone who's trying to do things for themselves to get the green tea in the diet, to get those EGCG compounds and other things that it contains, to make the tea the routine. And then you've got your things that you can add to that in order to help sort of bring out the properties that you're looking for in these natural substances.
Right.
And dare I give a shameless plug for our own product, the MycoLife Moss Method Mushroom Formula, which is also something that can be added to the tea or the coffee.
Absolutely.
As part of the daily routine.
Right.
It's relevant here in this case because we're talking about things you can add to a tea.
And I'm a great believer in synergy. We've talked about it, comes up in almost all of our podcasts, and that would be like so many instances when they look for a greater than additive effect, they usually find it if you combine different elements, especially when you've got things that are working on different mechanisms, different levels. So you've got the MycoLife mushrooms working at the level of the immune system. Right. And then you've got the MCP modified citrus pectin working at the level of the Galectin-3. And then you've got the green tea, EGCG, working at the level of the polyphenols and all the things that they do. So you're not just multiplying in terms of the anti-cancer, you're triangulating against the cancer cell. You're coming at that cancer cell from a number of different vulnerabilities that it has.
And we can also add in, if you're taking it with coffee, then you've got the polyphenols from the coffee.
Right.
And you've also got what we recommend to many people to add in to the coffee, the roasted chicory, which adds in the soluble fiber, which aids in the microbiome. So really, you're right. I mean, there's a multi-pronged approach. I guess you'd call it holistic, in that you're really angling it at a lot of different systems of the body.
Certainly, and it's scientific because we're looking for and often finding what the actual chemical basis is for the activity. It's not just like, oh, it makes me feel better, or I have a better psychological outlook, which I do. But, that's not the main effect. The main effect is that you know that there's a credible rationale for doing it. And, and that doesn't mean excluding the more conventional therapies, which do a lot of the heavy lifting in anybody's struggle against cancer, but something that could be added in with no evidence of it being harmful and a lot of evidence of it being beneficial.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure those men who participated in the study were grateful to get it.
I'm sure they were.
Yeah.
Some of them, as you know, they said that 7 or 9, I think 7 of them dropped out of the study because it was too. The travel time was too much. It got to be quite congested areas where they live in, and traffic jams and so forth. So they just bought it on their own because it isn't that expensive. I mean,
Right.
when your life is at stake, it certainly isn't. But they believed in it enough to want to go ahead and do it,
Sure.
which is going to be a problem when they get to actually do randomized trials, because that's what happens with randomized trials, as we talked about before.
Right.
People
tend to take it even if they're, because they don't want to end up in the placebo group. They want the stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They kind of screw up the study in the guise of trying to help themselves, but
Oh, well.
that's human nature. You can't blame
Right.
people for that.
No, certainly not.
Right.
All right. Is there anything else about modified citrus pectin that you have to share with us, or any other comments you'd like to make?
Well, dare I say that we are not in any way connected to the company or the people making this. I say
Well,
that because
That's not entirely true. I will
Oh.
tell you, knowing that
Oh.
this topic was coming up,
okay.
I actually reached out to the company to get
Oh.
an affiliate link, because sometimes, videos go viral, and then
Okay.
it can benefit us and the channel to get a few dollars, but certainly not our point of trying to promote this in any way, shape, or form. So no, we don't own any stock,
Right.
or anything like that. But full transparency,
Right.
we do have an affiliate link in the description.
That's
But
fine.
if you prefer to go directly there to get it yourself without clicking that link, that's
Right.
fine too. If you feel like you'd like to get some based on this research, then more power to you.
Right. And everybody does that. Like New York Times has the exact same connection to their things that
Yeah,
they,
but
they write about.
our reputation is unbiased.
Right.
And it's important for us to maintain that unbiased reputation. So that's why I mentioned, in full
Yeah,
transparency,
that's good.
where
That's
affiliate links exist.
right. But I feel confident that my and your enthusiasm for this substance is nothing to do with the financial side of it. It's exciting. It's something very. It's since we always have being thrown in our faces that where are your clinical trials? Well, here's an example. Here's our clinical trial.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And now it's been out almost 2 years, and literally Nutraceutical Weekly was the only publication that picked it up and actually wrote about it. So sometimes you can, even when you get the clinical trial, it doesn't mean that automatically it's going to be successful in terms of the world, but it can be successful in terms of the individual.
Well, I think what we might want to do is put a link in the description to, the name of I forget what the name of it is now, but it used to be called the Board of Alternative Medicine at the National Institute of Health, which you put in a decade of service with, to maybe encourage them to pick this one up and do a little bit of funding towards a little deeper research. I'd love to see more resources that are being put into cancer research in particular, be directed towards these natural substances. And certainly their budget has increased since your days of being there. And maybe they would choose to do something like this.
Well, maybe,
encouragement.
National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, I think is what you're
That's
referring.
why nobody remembers.
No, it's a mouthful.
I like the Office of Alternative Medicine.
No, it was a lot catchier, I'll tell you.
All right. Well, thanks for looking into that research, for sharing it with us. Happy birthday again.
Thank you.
All of your fans out there are in your corner and supporting you, and I know we're going to get a lot of nice birthday wishes. I hope you'll be looking at those comments.
I always do.
But
I always
the
do.
most important comment is from me, your biggest fan.
Oh, thank you, Ben.
Okay, so for now, for the Moss Report, I'm Ben Moss. How are you healing today?